John followed her down a long corridor, straight into the core chamber. The final decision: escape or die. The Citadel's power core pulsed like a massive beating heart, glowing with pure energy. "Plant the explosives," Kale ordered. John and Syrah rushed forward, setting detonators around the core. They had 5 minutes before the whole place blew. "Time to go," John yelled. They sprinted back toward the hangar, but the blast doors slammed shut. A deep, familiar voice echoed through the chamber. "You think you have won." John turned, and his blood ran cold. The Emperor's second-in-command, Lord Kryn, stood in their path. He was twice the size of any soldier, covered in obsidian black armor. "You killed my Emperor. Now you die." John tightened his grip on his blaster. "Not today." The final fight. Kryn charged. John dodged as a massive energy blade swung past his face, slicing through metal like paper. He fired, but Kryn deflected the shots with a flick of his blade. "That's cheating," John muttered. Kyra leaped forward, her own blade clashing against Kryn's. Sparks flew as they fought, a deadly blur of movement. John saw an opening. "Kyra, move." She jumped aside just as John grabbed an explosive charge from his belt and threw it onto Kryn's armor. Beep. The warlord's eyes widened. Boom. The explosion sent Kryn flying, slamming into the wall. He didn't get up. John let out a breath. "We are never doing that again." Syrah smirked. Agreed. They ran. The end of the Empire. The moment they reached the hangar, they blasted out of the Citadel at full speed. Seconds later, the station exploded. A wave of fire erupted into space, the shockwave rippling outward. The Citadel was gone. The Empire was dead. John slumped back in his seat. "We actually did it." Syrah smiled. "Yes, we did." The Resistance fleet cheered over the comms. The war was over. A new beginning. Back on Valtrex 9, the Resistance gathered to celebrate. The people were free. John stood beside Kyra, staring at the stars. "So what now?" he asked. She smiled. "Now, we rebuild. Together." John grinned. "I like the sound of that." Above them, the night sky shimmered. The galaxy was theirs to shape, and humanity. Humanity had just begun its rise. Escape or death. The ultimate decision. The jungle night on Valtrex 9 was alive with the sound of alien insects, their rhythmic chirping blending with the distant hum of Resistance ships hovering above the tree canopy. Fires burned in the clearing, casting flickering shadows on the faces of those who had fought and survived. John sat near the largest fire, staring into the flames, his mind still racing from the battle. He had fought an empire and won, at least for now, but something told him this was far from over. Across from him, Princess Xyra stood, deep in conversation with the Resistance leaders. She carried herself differently now, not just as a fugitive, but as a warrior. He had no idea what came next, but he knew one thing for sure. There was no going back. A meeting of survivors. The leaders of the Resistance, a group of hardened alien warriors, former generals, and exiled nobles, gathered around a makeshift table made from salvaged ship parts. A holographic map of the galaxy floated above it, pulsing with enemy movements. One of the commanders, a grizzled reptilian alien named General Kale, studied John with his glowing yellow eyes. "I must admit," he rumbled, "I did not think a human could fight like that." John smirked. "Yeah. Well, you should see me with a coffee and a good night's sleep. I'd be even more dangerous." A few warriors chuckled, but Syrah remained serious. "The Emperor is dead, his flagship destroyed. But the Empire is still strong," she said. "We dealt them a heavy blow, but they will regroup, and they will come for us." The room fell into silence. Finally, General Kell crossed his arms. "Then we have only two choices. We flee, or we take the fight to them." John sat up. "Wait, you're saying we attack?" after barely surviving the last battle. Kale nodded. The Empire will not stop hunting us. If we run, we die tired. But if we strike now, before they reorganize, we have a chance. Zyra turned to John. We need you for this, John. The people trust you now. You are living proof that the Empire is not invincible. John exhaled. He was just some guy from Earth. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a hero. But he had survived. And he wasn't going to sit back and let the Empire crush them. All right, he said. Let's finish what we started. The final mission, storming the Imperial Citadel. The plan was insane. The Imperial Citadel, the true heart of the Empire, was a massive fortress in space, orbiting a dying red star. It was the last stronghold where the Emperor's loyalists had gathered, trying to rebuild their power. If they could destroy the Citadel, the Empire would fall for good. John sat inside the cockpit of his new fighter, a sleek, black resistance warship built for speed and stealth. Beside him, Zyra sat in the co-pilot seat, her fingers dancing across the controls. You ready for this? She asked. John smirked. Not even a little. But let's do it anyway. The resistance fleet lurched forward, slipping into lightspeed toward their final battle. The Empire's last stand. As soon as they dropped out of hyperspace, they were met with fire. The Citadel's defense cannons roared to life, launching massive energy blasts through the darkness. Resistance ships twisted and turned, dodging through the chaos as the battle began. Here we go, Zyra shouted. John gritted his teeth and pushed the ship into a steep dive, narrowly avoiding a plasma burst. His hands moved on instinct now. This wasn't a game, but it sure felt like one. We need to get inside the Citadel. Cal's voice crackled through the comms. Blow the core, and the whole station goes with it. John pulled the ship into formation, following the strike team toward a narrow opening in the Citadel's outer defenses. I see the target, Zyra shouted. John grinned. Then let's go knock. They dove toward the enemy station, infiltrating the Citadel. John landed the ship inside a darkened hangar bay, the airlock hissing as they stepped out onto the cold steel floor. Resistance fighters poured into the hallways, weapons ready. Alarms blared. The Empire knew they were here. Move fast, Zyra commanded. Find the core and set the charges. John sprinted through the corridors, his blaster ready. The Citadel was massive, filled with towering columns and eerie red lighting. Suddenly, enemy soldiers appeared. Blaster fire erupted as the two sides clashed. John ducked behind cover, firing back. One enemy fell, then another. Zyra fought beside him, moving with deadly precision. Every shot she fired hit its mark. We're close, she shouted. John smirked, his hands flying across the controls. You ever heard of fighter jets? I played a lot of flight sims back on Earth. The princess stared at him. You're telling me you're using video game skills to outfly a war fleet? John laughed. Welcome to humanity. He yanked the controls, sending the ship spinning between two enemy cruisers. The warships hesitated. They weren't used to such erratic movements. And that was exactly what John was counting on. The resistance fights back. As the battle raged in the skies, a sudden voice crackled through the ship's radio. Unidentified ship, you are entering resistance territory. Identify yourself. The princess grabbed the transmitter. This is Princess Zyra. I have escaped the Empire. I bring a human ally. Silence. Then, a different voice spoke. Welcome home, Princess. Reinforcements are on their way. John grinned. Finally, some backup. Seconds later, the jungle below them erupted with movement. Dozens of sleek, black resistance ships shot into the sky, heading straight for the enemy fleet. Let's see how they like a fair fight, John muttered. The resistance fighters tore into the Empire's ships, launching precise energy blasts that rocked the massive cruisers. John took advantage of the chaos, weaving through the battlefield and dodging enemy fire. We need to take out their command ship, Syra shouted. John nodded. I'm on it. He pushed the ship forward, speeding toward the largest cruiser at the center of the fleet. The final confrontation. As they neared the command ship, an urgent warning flashed on the screen. Incoming transmission. Emperor himself. The holographic display flickered, and the Emperor's face appeared. His golden eyes burned with fury. You think you can defy me, daughter? He growled. You think this pathetic human can save you? John smirked. Well, I did beat your best warrior, outsmart your trials, and escape your prison. So yeah, I'd say I've got a pretty good record. The Emperor's expression darkened. You have made a grave mistake, human. You will not leave this battle alive. John's grin didn't fade. We'll see about that. Asterisk asterisk. Syra cut the transmission. We need to end this. Now. John nodded. Time to do something really stupid. Asterisk asterisk. He yanked the controls, aiming the ship directly at the command cruiser. Syra's eyes widened. Are you trying to ram them? John shook his head. Nope, just getting close enough. At the last second, he fired the ship's entire energy reserves into the command ship's shield generators. The explosion was massive. The enemy warship lurched violently, its shields flickering and dying. Syra's comms crackled. Now's your chance, resistance fighters. Take the shot. A resistance cruiser fired a concentrated energy beam straight into the command ship. The Emperor's flagship erupted into flames. John barely had time to pull the ship away before the massive explosion sent shockwaves rippling through the sky. The remaining warships, seeing their leader destroyed, began retreating. John exhaled. Did we just win? Syra nodded, watching the last of the Empire's ships disappear into space. Yes, but this is just the beginning. A new future. Later that night, the Resistance held a gathering deep in the jungles of Voltrex 9. Fires burned brightly, and warriors sat around discussing their next steps. John sat beside Syra, finally able to breathe. You fought well today, she admitted. John smirked. Not bad for a human, huh? She rolled her eyes but smiled. Not bad at all. He looked at her. So what happens now? Syra's gaze turned toward the stars. Now we prepare. The Emperor may be dead, but the Empire is not. We will need every ally, every warrior, every advantage we can get. John took a deep breath. And me. Syra turned back to him, her expression unreadable. You are no longer a prisoner, John. You are one of us. A slow grin spread across John's face. Then let's finish what we started. Above them, the stars shimmered. The battle was won. But the war had just begun. John sprinted forward, dodging laser fire as guards rushed into the hangar. The princess extended a hand toward him. Jump. John didn't think. He leaped. For a terrifying second, he was weightless, falling. Then, a strong alien hand grabbed his wrist and yanked him up. John collapsed onto the ship's floor, gasping for breath. The princess hit a control panel, and the ship's engines roared to life. Hold on, she shouted. The spacecraft blasted into the sky, streaking through the palace's upper atmosphere. The chase. The Emperor wasn't going to let them leave that easily. As soon as they entered open space, 3 royal warships appeared behind them, engines burning bright. They're locking onto us, John shouted. The princess's fingers flew over the controls. Not if I can help it. She twisted the ship into a sharp dive, narrowly avoiding a barrage of plasma blasts. The entire ship shook violently. We won't make it at this speed, John yelled. The princess gritted her teeth. We don't have to. We just need to reach the jump gate. Ahead of them, a swirling blue vortex shimmered in the darkness. A wormhole. Their only escape. The warships behind them charged their cannons. Hold on, the princess shouted. The ship shot forward, straight into the wormhole. For a moment, everything turned into a blur of blue light. Then, silence. When John opened his eyes, the warships were gone. They had escaped. What now? John exhaled, slumping back against the co-pilot's chair. I can't believe that worked, he muttered. The princess smirked. Neither can I. John turned to her. So, what now? She glanced at him, her expression serious but determined. Now, John, we fight back. John felt a slow grin spread across his face. Then let's do it. The final battle. A human fights back. John sat in the cockpit, his hands gripping the armrests as the stolen spacecraft hurtled through the vast darkness of space. His body still buzzed with adrenaline from their daring escape. He could hardly believe it. They had actually gotten away. Beside him, the princess worked the controls, her silver hair catching the soft glow of the console lights. Her expression was unreadable, her sharp blue eyes scanning the galaxy map in front of them. We aren't safe yet, she said grimly. John exhaled, rubbing his face. Yeah, figured. Where are we going? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pressed a few buttons, and a planet appeared on the holographic screen. A dense, jungle-covered world, its surface dotted with hidden cities buried beneath the trees. This is Valtrex 9, she said. It's where the resistance is hiding. If we can reach them, we'll have a chance to fight back. John leaned forward. So we're not just running. We're making a stand. The princess met his gaze. Yes, we're going to take down the Emperor. A slow, determined grin spread across John's face. Then let's get to work. The Empire strikes back. They didn't even make it to the planet before trouble found them. Just as they entered the outer atmosphere, alarms blared through the ship. They found us, the princess shouted. John looked at the radar screen. 3 massive warships had appeared behind them, moving fast. The Emperor's fleet. They must have tracked our jump signature, she growled. They won't let us escape again. John's heart pounded. Then we don't escape. We fight. The princess gave him a sharp look. Are you insane? That's a war fleet. John grinned. Yeah, but they don't know how humans fight. Before she could argue, John slammed his hand onto the control panel, switching the ship into manual mode. Strap in. The ship jerked violently as John pulled it into a sharp nosedive. The warships behind them opened fire, massive plasma blasts tearing through the sky. John dodged. The ship spun through the air, narrowly avoiding the deadly blasts. The speed, the angles. John was thinking like a fighter pilot. The princess's eyes widened. How are you doing that? This ship wasn't built for combat. The betrayal and the escape plan. John sat on the cold metallic bench, his hands still shaking from the battle. His mind raced. He had survived the final trial. He had defeated the champion warrior Valcor without killing him, proving himself to be more than just a pawn in the Emperor's game. But something felt wrong. Across from him, the alien princess, his supposed fiancé, watched him carefully. You did the impossible, she said, her voice quiet but filled with something he hadn't heard before. Respect. Admiration. Or was it something else? John exhaled sharply. Yeah. Well, I don't feel like I won anything. The final trial was over, but the wedding was still happening. And if that happened, he would be tied to this empire forever. Unless, do you trust me? The princess asked suddenly. John looked up. Her blue eyes burned with urgency. After everything I've been through, John let out a breath. I don't have much choice, do I? She nodded. Then listen carefully. We don't have much time. We have to escape tonight. A wedding or a death sentence. The Grand Palace was alive with activity. The corridors were filled with alien nobles, warriors, and diplomats, all preparing for the grand ceremony. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a political event. John was dressed in royal ceremonial robes, black and silver with golden symbols etched into the fabric. They felt heavy, suffocating, as if they weren't just clothes, but chains. Guards flanked him on both sides as he was led toward the grand chamber where the ceremony would take place. Massive banners with the emperor's symbol hung from the towering walls, shimmering under alien lights. The air smelled of strange incense, a mix of metallic spice and something floral. John's heart pounded. The princess was somewhere else in the palace, preparing for the wedding. This was it. Their last chance. He had no idea what her escape plan was, but he was about to find out. The betrayal. As he neared the ceremony hall, a voice called out, "Stop!" John turned his head and felt his stomach drop. Lord Valcor, the same warrior John had defeated in the final trial, now stood before him, his golden armor gleaming under the lights. His expression was unreadable. John's pulse quickened. Was Valcor still angry about the fight? Was he about to challenge him again? The guards around John stiffened but didn't move. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a blade. Then Valcor spoke. "The Emperor does not trust you, human." John clenched his jaw. "I figured as much." Valcor stepped forward, towering over him. His golden eyes locked onto John's. "Neither should I." But he hesitated, then added, "You fight with honor, and I respect that." John narrowed his eyes. "What are you saying?" Valcor's gaze hardened. "I am saying that I know you plan to escape, and I am here to stop you." John's blood turned to ice. The guards behind him immediately drew their weapons. John's mind screamed, "It's over." But then, Valcor did something that shocked him. Instead of drawing his own weapon, he knelt. "But I will not serve a dishonorable ruler." John's breath caught in his throat. "I will help you escape." The escape begins. John didn't have time to process it. Within moments, Valcor had taken out the guards with precise, brutal efficiency. "Move," Valcor ordered, tossing John a small metallic wristband. "The princess sent this for you. Put it on." John grabbed the device and strapped it around his wrist. It immediately flashed blue, scanning his skin. Emergency override activated. A holographic map of the palace appeared in midair, showing a blinking escape route. John's stomach twisted. This was real. This was happening. "The princess is waiting for you," Valcor said, his voice low. "Go." John didn't hesitate. He ran. Breaking out. The corridors were chaos. Guards were already swarming, alarms blaring in an alien language. John sprinted down the narrow pathways, his mind focused on the map displayed on his wrist. Intruder detected. Seal all exits. John slid under a closing blast door, barely making it through before it slammed shut behind him. "Where is she?" he muttered, scanning the map. The princess was supposed to be ahead. A sharp noise caught his attention, the whir of an engine. John turned the corner and froze. A small, sleek spacecraft hovered just above an open hangar platform. The princess stood at the entrance, her silver hair blowing in the wind. "John, hurry." She clenched her jaw. "Between my father's empire and the resistance." John's pulse quickened. "Wait, there's a resistance." She nodded. "Not all of us follow the emperor blindly. There are those who believe in a different future. A future where power does not rest in bloodlines and forced traditions. But my father sees them as a threat. He wants to crush them before they grow stronger." John leaned back, processing her words. "Okay, so why tell me this? What does it have to do with me?" The princess hesitated. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Because I am part of the resistance." John felt his heart skip a beat. He stared at her. You're a rebel." Her expression was deadly serious. "I was raised in a golden cage, trained to be a pawn in my father's rule. But I see the truth now. I have seen what he does to those who oppose him, and I refuse to be part of it." John ran a hand through his hair. "This just keeps getting worse. So where do I fit into all this?" he asked carefully. The princess took a deep breath. Then she said the words that shook him to the core. "Because I need you to win the final trial. If you do, we can escape together." The final trial. The fight to the death. The next morning, the arena was filled again. But this time, the energy in the air was different. The final trial wasn't a test of intelligence or survival. It was a fight. A battle to the death. John stood at the center of the combat pit, his hands clenched into fists. Across from him stood his opponent, a towering alien warrior, almost 7 feet tall, covered in golden armor. "Your opponent is Lord Valcor," the Emperor announced from above. "A champion of our empire. If you are truly worthy, you will defeat him. If not, you will die." John swallowed hard. He had no weapons, no training, no chance. The warrior drew a massive curved blade, its edges humming with deadly energy. John had never seen a more dangerous opponent in his life. And then, the fight began. The fight for survival. Valcor moved like a blur. Despite his size, he was fast, far too fast for someone his weight. John barely dodged the first strike, the blade missing his throat by inches. The second attack came even faster. John ducked, rolling across the ground, barely avoiding the deadly energy blade. The crowd roared. To them, this was entertainment. To John, this was his execution. Think, John. Think. He wasn't stronger than Valcor. He wasn't faster. But he was human. And humans don't fight fair. The turning point. John stopped running. Instead, he turned toward Valcor and did the last thing anyone expected. He taunted him. "That's the best you've got." John spat, breathing hard. "Come on, big guy. I thought you were a champion." Valcor snarled. He charged again, this time, faster and angrier. That's it. John had seen this before. Fighters who let their rage control them made mistakes. As Valcor lunged, John sidestepped at the last second, grabbing a handful of the arena's dirt and shoving it into the warrior's eyes. The alien roared, momentarily blinded. John took his chance. He leaped onto the warrior's back, grabbing at the weak points of his armor. Valcor stumbled, just for a second. And that second was all John needed. With every ounce of strength, he smashed Valcor's head against the stone pillar nearby. The golden helmet cracked. The warrior fell to the ground, dazed. The crowd gasped. John snatched the fallen warrior's blade, flipping it in his hand. He stood over his enemy, his chest rising and falling with exhaustion. Valcor stared up at him, defeated. John lifted the blade, then paused. He looked up at the Emperor. "Is this what you wanted?" The Emperor's eyes narrowed. "Finish him." John took a deep breath. Then, in a bold voice, he said, "No." Silence fell over the arena. The Emperor's expression darkened. "You refuse." John straightened. "I won the fight. That should be enough." The Emperor stared at him for a long moment. Then, with a slow, wicked smile, he spoke. "Very well, human. You have passed the final trial. The wedding will proceed." John's blood ran cold. What have I just done? A new future, or a new trap? That night, back in the chamber, the princess faced him again. "You did it," she said softly. "You survived." John exhaled. "Yeah, but I think I made things worse." She smiled. A real, genuine smile. "No, John. You did exactly what we needed. And now, we make our next move." John frowned. Next move. Her eyes burned with determination. "Now, we take down the Emperor." His eyes darted around the arena. No weapons, no cover. Just him and a monster. "Think, John. Think." The beast roared again, spinning toward him. Its movements were fast, but predictable. That was it. John realized something. It's big, strong, and deadly. But it's not smart. A new plan formed in his mind. He took a deep breath, braced himself, and then ran straight toward the monster. The crowd gasped. The beast lunged, jaws wide open. At the last second, John dropped to the ground, sliding beneath its belly. As he passed under, he saw its weak spot, a soft patch between the armor plates. John grabbed a sharp piece of broken stone from the arena floor. As he slid past, he drove the sharp rock into the weak spot with all his strength. The beast let out an ear-splitting shriek. It staggered, its limbs trembling, and then, with one final groan, it collapsed to the ground. The arena fell silent. Then, a roar of approval erupted from the audience. John sat there, gasping for breath. "I can't believe that worked." Above, the Emperor's expression remained unreadable. Then he spoke. "The human passes the first trial." John let out a breath. 1 down, 2 to go. The second trial, the mind probe. After a short rest, John was taken to a massive silver chamber filled with floating symbols and holographic screens. The second trial was different. No weapons, no monsters, just John and a machine. At the center of the chamber stood a floating metallic sphere, glowing with pulsating energy. The Emperor's voice echoed through the hall. "The second trial will test your intelligence. This machine will scan your mind. If you are weak, your mind will break." John felt a chill run down his spine. Great. No pressure. The sphere hummed. Then, without warning, a beam of light shot out, piercing into John's forehead. John gasped. His vision blurred. His thoughts scattered. Suddenly, he wasn't in the room anymore. He was somewhere else. Memories swirled around him. His childhood, his struggles, his fears. A voice whispered in his mind, "You are weak. You are alone. You do not belong here." Images of Earth flashed before him. His family, his home, everything he had lost. He felt his chest tighten. "No, I can't lose myself." The voices grew louder. They wanted him to break, to give in. John clenched his fists. "No, I am still here. I am still me." A wave of energy exploded from his mind, pushing back against the machine. The sphere trembled. Then it shut down. John gasped, falling to his knees. Silence. Then the Emperor spoke. "The human passes the second trial." John let out a shaky breath. 2 down, 1 to go. But as he stood up, he noticed something. The princess was watching him carefully. And for the first time, there was something new in her expression. Not just curiosity. Hope. The unexpected twist. The princess has a secret. John had barely recovered from the second trial when they dragged him back to the waiting chamber. His body ached. His mind felt like it had been ripped apart and stitched back together. And worst of all, he knew the hardest challenge was still ahead. The final trial. He collapsed onto a metallic bench, breathing hard. The chamber was quiet, except for the faint hum of the glowing walls. Then he realized he wasn't alone. The princess stood across from him, her silver hair glowing softly under the alien lights. Her piercing blue eyes studied him, not with cold judgment, but something different this time, something that made John uneasy. "You surprised them," she said finally. John let out a dry laugh. "Yeah. Well, I surprised myself too." She tilted her head slightly, as if considering something. Then she stepped forward. "You are stronger than they thought. Stronger than I thought." John narrowed his eyes. "Okay, what's going on? First, you didn't even want this marriage. Now you're acting like I'm your best bet." She hesitated. For the first time, she looked uncertain. Then, in a low voice, she said something that changed everything. "Because I cannot fight this battle alone." A secret revealed. John's breath caught. "What do you mean?" The princess glanced at the energy field blocking the doorway, ensuring they were truly alone. Then she turned back to him, her blue eyes dark with something close to fear. "There is more at stake here than you realize. This trial, this marriage, none of it is what it seems." John frowned. Then what is it? She let out a slow breath, then stepped even closer. A war is coming, John. John's stomach twisted. A war, he repeated. Between who? John frowned. What does that mean? She studied him for a moment before saying something that sent a chill down his spine. Because humans are unpredictable, and that terrifies them. John blinked. Wait, you mean your people fear us? Not all of them. But the Emperor, the High Council, yes. To them, humans are dangerous because they are too adaptable, too emotional, too stubborn. They do not know how to control you. John laughed dryly. Well, great. Instead of killing me, they decide to marry me into the royal family. That doesn't make sense. The princess gave him a bitter smile. It does when you realize what they truly want. John's blood ran cold. And what do they want? She took a step closer, lowering her voice. To make sure humanity never becomes a threat. Silence filled the room. John's mind raced. This isn't just about a marriage. It's a political move. They wanted to keep him under control, to ensure that humanity remained weak, compliant, and under their influence. His fists clenched. He wasn't just some pawn in an alien game. He refused to be. But how could he escape? And then something happened that changed everything. The princess stepped even closer, so close that John could see the faint glow of her eyes in the dim light. I have a plan, she whispered. But you need to trust me. John stared at her. A day ago, he was just a normal guy walking home. Now he was in an alien palace, engaged to an alien princess, and standing at the edge of a decision that could change everything. What choice did he have? The trial of the groom. John sat in stunned silence, his mind racing. A plan. The alien princess, his supposed future wife, had just told him she had a plan. A part of him wanted to laugh. He was still struggling to process the fact that he had been abducted, declared engaged, and now faced a life-or-death decision. And now she was whispering about some secret strategy. He narrowed his eyes. What kind of plan? The princess glanced toward the glowing energy field that blocked the entrance, ensuring the guards were far enough not to hear. Then she leaned in. A way out of this. John felt his heart hammer. Escape. The princess shook her head. Not exactly. If we try to run now, they'll kill us before we take 3 steps outside this chamber. We need a smarter way out. John frowned. Okay, so what's the alternative? She took a deep breath. You survived the trials. John froze. Trials? She gave him a grim nod. To prove yourself as a worthy husband, you will be tested. 3 trials. If you pass, you will be officially accepted as my consort and gain the rights of royalty. That is the only way you will be in a position strong enough to find a real escape. John ran a hand through his hair. Consort. Trials. This keeps getting worse. All right, he muttered. What kind of trials are we talking about? She hesitated, her expression darkening. The first is a test of survival. The second is a test of the mind. The third is combat. John let out a sharp breath. Great. Of course, there's fighting. He glanced at the princess. She was watching him carefully, as if measuring his reaction. You really think I can do this? He asked. She was quiet for a moment before saying, I don't know. But if you don't try, you're dead anyway. John sighed. Well, no pressure, huh? The first trial, the pit of beasts. The next morning, John found himself standing at the edge of a massive arena. The pit was deep, surrounded by high walls of shimmering metal, glowing with strange energy fields. The crowd above was huge. Aliens of all shapes and sizes watched, their eyes glowing with curiosity and hunger for entertainment. At the center of the arena was a dark tunnel, covered in thick steel bars. Something moved behind them, hidden in the shadows. Something big. John swallowed hard. From the royal balcony, the emperor stood tall. His voice boomed across the arena. Let the first trial begin. The bars snapped open. John barely had time to react before a massive creature emerged. It was twice the size of a bear, covered in razor-sharp armor plates. Its eyes burned like molten fire, and its claws looked sharp enough to slice through steel. The moment it spotted John, it let out a deafening roar. John's mind screamed, "Run!" But there was nowhere to go. The beast charged. John barely dove aside as the creature's claws slammed into the ground, shattering the stone like glass. Dust exploded around them as John scrambled to his feet. He needed a plan. Fast. John's heart pounded. So she didn't know either. It has been decided, the Emperor said calmly. This union will strengthen our empire. The human must accept. John swallowed hard. His mind was racing. He had been abducted, dragged into a world he didn't understand, and now he was being forced to marry an alien princess. This couldn't be real. And if I refuse? John asked slowly. The Emperor's golden eyes flashed dangerously. Then you will never return to Earth. A heavy silence filled the room. John's heart felt like it was going to burst out of his chest. He was trapped. The princess looked at him, then at her father, and then whispered the words that made John's blood run cold. If he refuses, they will kill him. The princess and the impossible situation. John's heart was still pounding from the Emperor's words. The air in the throne room felt heavy, pressing down on him like an invisible weight. The grand hall, the towering pillars, the alien crowd watching in silence. It was all too much. He stole a glance at the princess. She stood still, her violet skin catching the dim light of the room, her silver hair flowing down her back like liquid metal. But it wasn't her strange beauty that caught John's attention. It was the look in her eyes. She wasn't happy about this. She wasn't even neutral. She was furious. Her jaw was clenched, her fists curled tightly at her sides. The way she stared at her father, the Emperor, wasn't the look of a loving daughter. It was the look of someone who had just been betrayed. John wasn't the only one trapped in this situation. The first conversation. Before John could say anything, the Emperor waved his hand. Take them to the waiting chamber. The ceremony preparations begin soon. John barely had time to react before the same silver-skinned guards grabbed him by the arms again. But this time, the princess was with him. They were both being escorted away. The doors of the throne room slammed shut behind them, and soon they were walking through a long, dimly lit hallway. John took a deep breath. His mind was racing. Should he speak? Ask questions? Stay silent? Before he could decide, the princess spoke first. This is a mistake, she muttered under her breath. Her voice was sharp, but controlled. John glanced at her. Oh, really? You don't say. I thought forced marriage to a complete stranger was a normal Tuesday. She shot him a look, one that could melt steel. But behind the anger, there was something else. Worry. Listen, human. I don't want this any more than you do, she said. But if you refuse, you will not survive. John's stomach twisted. And what if I say yes? The princess stopped walking. The guards barely noticed as she turned to face him, her piercing blue eyes locking onto his. If you say yes, then you belong to this empire. You will never see your planet again. You will be trapped in a royal prison, dressed in gold, but without freedom. And when they decide you are no longer useful. She didn't finish her sentence. John swallowed hard. So I'm dead either way. Yes, she admitted. The hallway suddenly felt even colder. The secret meeting. The guards led them through another massive doorway, into what looked like a royal waiting chamber. The walls were covered in strange glowing patterns, shifting like waves of light. A circular window in the ceiling showed a breathtaking view of the stars. The guards stepped back. One of them pressed a button on the wall, and a blue energy field appeared over the entrance. Do not attempt to escape, one of them warned. You will be called when it is time. With that, they left. John and the princess were alone. He turned to her. "All right, since we're stuck here, mind explaining what's going on? Why me? Why this? There has to be a reason." The princess hesitated. She crossed her arms and looked away, as if debating whether she should even bother answering. Then, with a sigh, she spoke. "You are human. That alone is enough reason." The abduction and the shocking news. John never expected his day to turn into a nightmare. He was just an ordinary man living an ordinary life on Earth. One moment, he was walking home after work, tired and thinking about what to eat for dinner. The next moment, everything changed. A bright light exploded around him, blinding him completely. His body felt weightless, like he was floating in the air. A loud humming noise filled his ears, and his stomach twisted as if he was falling, yet he wasn't moving. His mind screamed in confusion. Then, darkness. When John opened his eyes, his breath caught in his throat. He was no longer on Earth. A strange new world. John found himself lying on a cold, metallic floor. The air smelled different, sharp, clean, and unnatural. Strange symbols glowed on the walls around him, pulsing with a soft blue light. He sat up quickly, his heart pounding. What is this place?" he whispered. Before he could think further, the floor beneath him began to move. No, not the floor. The entire room was shifting. The walls stretched and twisted, revealing a giant doorway ahead. John's pulse raced. He scrambled to his feet just as two towering figures stepped into the room. They weren't human. Their skin was a deep shade of silver, their eyes black and glowing from within, and their armor sleek and alien, covered in strange symbols. They carried long, curved weapons that looked both futuristic and deadly. John took a step back, but one of them raised a clawed hand and spoke in a deep, commanding voice. "Do not resist, human. The Emperor is waiting." Before John could even argue, one of the aliens pressed a device on his wrist. A jolt of energy shot through his body, freezing him in place. His muscles locked, and he could only watch as the aliens grabbed his arms and dragged him forward. The Emperor's palace. The corridor outside was massive. The walls stretched so high that John could barely see the ceiling. Strange floating lights hovered in the air, illuminating the path ahead. Hundreds of aliens moved through the halls, each different in size and shape, but all sharing the same cold, calculating stare when they looked at him. John's mind raced. Where am I? What do they want from me? After what felt like an eternity, the aliens pulled him through a gigantic golden door that led into an enormous chamber. John's eyes widened. The room was a throne hall, massive and grand. The ceiling shimmered like the night sky, filled with moving constellations. Towering pillars lined the hall, each carved with intricate alien designs. At the center of it all was a throne made of dark metal, pulsating with energy. And on that throne sat the Emperor. He was even larger than the others, his silver skin gleaming under the strange light. A flowing black and gold robe covered his body, and his piercing golden eyes locked onto John with an intensity that made his blood run cold. The shocking announcement. John barely had time to process anything before the Emperor raised a hand. The room fell silent. "Human," the Emperor spoke, his voice echoing through the chamber. "You have been chosen." John blinked. "See, chosen for what?" His voice was hoarse, dry from fear. The Emperor leaned forward, a cruel smile forming on his lips. "You are now engaged to my daughter." Silence. John's brain stopped working. "What?" he blurted out. The aliens around the room remained emotionless, watching him like he was some kind of experiment. The Emperor's expression didn't change. "You will marry my daughter, the princess of our empire. This is not a request. It is a decision that has been made." John's mouth went dry. This had to be a mistake. A joke. A misunderstanding. I think you have the wrong guy," John said, his voice shaky. "I don't even know who your daughter is. I don't even know what's going on." The Emperor ignored him. He waved a hand, and from behind the throne, a figure stepped forward. John's breath caught in his throat as the alien princess appeared. The alien princess. She was nothing like what he expected. Her skin was a deep shade of violet, smooth and almost glowing. Her long silver hair flowed down her back, and her piercing blue eyes burned with intelligence and frustration. Her features were alien, yet strangely beautiful, like something out of a dream. But most of all, she looked just as shocked as John. Her eyes widened as she looked at him, then turned sharply toward her father. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice sharp and filled with anger. "You never told me I was getting married to a human."